Okay, great. Well, good afternoon, everybody tuning in at home or in your uni accommodation or wherever you are. Welcome to the Christian Union's event Fortnight. Wow, we have had a lot of events so far. And yeah, it's the fourth lunch bar. Can you believe it? I know. And we've been, so excited to have you guys along, whether it's for the first time, whether it's for the fourth time. Yeah, you're so welcome. We hope you've been challenged. We hope you've been intrigued by the events and the talk so far. And the good news is there's still more to come. So this Tuesday lunchtime, we've got a very special event where we're going to be talking to Stephen Borden on the topic facts and figures. Can God be added into the equation? So maybe it's more focused for you STEM students or science students or mathematics students, but actually just in general, anyone who's interested in this topic. Yeah, we want you to feel involved and invited. I think this is a great topic, a fascinating topic. I'm not a scientist, I am a historian, so maybe not in the right territory, but definitely find this really interesting. So with all that said, let me introduce Stephen to you guys. If Stephen, you want to come online, put your mic in your video. Lovely. Hi, Stephen.
Hello.
So maybe you could just briefly introduce yourself to us.
Yeah, sure. My name is Stephen, or Steve, like you said. I am a research fellow at Nottingham University. My background is physics, which I did at Leicester Uni, and then I did my PhD at Nottingham University and have stayed on working there. And my area of research is MRI physics. So I do lots of studies looking at health and how we use MRI to analyse particularly sport and diet. And we collaborate a lot with Loughborough University on a number of sports and exercise studies. So that's my kind of scientific background. But I live in Leicester. I'm married and got 3 children. And yeah, we're bumbling through lockdown at the moment.
Amazing. Thank you. It seems perfect that you could come on and help us with science and equations today. So Steve has really kindly agreed to do a Q&A afterwards. If you guys are aware, what we usually do is have the Slido app. And with that, put in the hashtag purpose23rd. So on the screen share, it will come up. Yeah, awesome. Thank you. So it's www.sly.do. And so with that, please put in some questions. Yeah, anything that's intrigued you or something that Steve said that maybe you want clarification about, or you're just interested, or just something that you want to argue against and you want to see what Steve has to say about it. We really, really encourage you to do so. And yeah, please do get involved. And so with all of that said, I'm very, very excited for this talk, but I will hand it over to you, Steve.
Okay, great. Well, I hope you've noted down that Slido tag where you get to that, because I'm just going to share some slides that hopefully you'll all be able to see. Okay, so today we're looking at facts and figures. Can God be added into the equations? And like I said, my background is scientific. So I actually love the equations, and I love the topic of this lunch bar, looking at how science and God relate to each other and how they link in. Like I said, my research is in MRI physics, and so seen as the lunch bar is about equations, let me throw up some equations that I use all the time in my work. Now, some of you might be recoiling in terror as you look at those equations, but what they do is those equations perfectly describe how an MRI system works and how we can analyze the spin physics and use it to produce those wonderful MRI images. Okay, stay with me if those equations have turned you a bit cold right at the start. So the question that we're looking at in this lunch bar is, can God be added to these equations, to equations? Where does God fit when we look at the equations that seem to describe reality so well? And let's just clarify a few things about the question before we dig into it. One question we may ask about that question is, what equations are we talking about? Now, if you go through the trawls of equations that you can find, there are equations that include God. Here's another equation. This is a probability equation, and the G in that equation refers to God. And this is a Bayesian probability equation. Don't worry if you don't know what that is. And this has been used by many theists to look at the probability that God exists. Okay, so there are some equations that include God. But of course, the question is really driving at those physical equations like the one I showed you at the start. When we look at the physical equations of the universe about how everything seems to work together in this mathematical way, where does God fit in? And what does it mean to add God? Maybe I need to adjust my equations that I use to just plus God at the end, and then suddenly somehow there's justification for those equations. And of course, that looks completely silly, doesn't it? We don't need to add God into those physical equations. And I guess that's the point. That's what drives this question. That's why often people find science and belief in God as clashing with each other, because it looks like we don't need to add God to those equations. The equations of the universe perfectly describe how everything works, the biological equations, the chemical equations, in engineering and physics, they seem to perfectly describe how the physical universe works. So why on earth do we need to think about God? Where does he fit in this equation? The conclusion may be, we don't need God. God isn't needed, and we can do well just thinking about the equations, the physics, the material world, without the need for this weird spiritual God theory. All right, well, let's dig into the question. I'm going to phrase it slightly differently so that we can capture what the question's driving. I want you to think about this question first. Are the equations enough on their own? So I'm going to show you another set of equations. Some of you may know what these are. These are called the Maxwell equations, and they perfectly describe how electromagnetism works. So they'll be used in calculating electricity and magnetism and how they behave together. And these equations are incredible. They perfectly describe how this system works, and we can derive from it the questions about electricity. We can look backwards and understand why electricity has worked in the way it has, and we can look forward. We can predict with these equations what is going to happen with electricity as we connect it together and as we set it up. So if we're asking the question, how does electromagnetism behave, then this set of equations perfectly describes everything we need to know. But I want us to think about other questions, because there are a whole list of questions, and when we begin to ask them about electricity and other things, we see that the equations don't answer those questions. Let me list a few for you. Here's the first one. What is it? What is electricity? Now, this might seem a little bit strange, but historically, scientists like Eddington and Bertrand Russell have noted that these equations describe how electricity and other phenomena interact with each other, but they don't actually tell us what it is. This is how Philip Goff puts it. Think about an electron. What does physics tell us about an electron? Physics tells us that an electron has mass and negative charge. How does physics characterize the mass and negative charge? Mass is characterized in terms of the disposition to attract other things with mass, and in terms of the disposition to resist acceleration. The more something has, the more mass something has, the harder it is to get to move. Negative charge is characterized in terms of negative charge being repelled by positively charged things. Note that all of this concerns the behavior of the electron, what it does in relation to other physical particles. And the same is true for everything else in physics. Physics confines itself to telling us only what an electron does. Yet intuitively, there must be more to what an electron is than what it does. An electron must have an intrinsic nature, as philosophers like to say. So this isn't called an ontological question, and the equations don't actually answer that question. Or what about another question? Why is it this way? Why do the equations work like this? Einstein gave this incredible quote where he says, the eternal mystery of the world is that it's comprehensible, it's mathematical. The fact that it is comprehensible is a miracle. Just ponder that for a sec. Why should it be that it works in such a mathematical way that we can write down in laws and equations, and that describes how it works? This might be thought of as a question about its origin. Why is it like it is? The equations don't tell us. What about this question? Is it important? Now, this may seem like a weird question. In itself, we may think, well, electricity, yeah, it's sort of just the way it is. But then what if we think about what electricity is used for? Imagine a scenario where we're using this electricity to power a life support machine. Well, now we need to ask the question, is it important? Is that electricity important? And yet these equations tell us nothing about the value of it. Or what about this question? What is it used for? And let me illustrate this with a analogy. Imagine you saw a kettle boiling. You went to a friend's house and the kettle was boiling. And you asked, why is the kettle boiling? Why is the water boiling? Now you could answer that using the equations. It's because the electricity is running into the elements and that's producing vibrations in the particle and that's heating up the water. Or you could answer it by simply saying, because I'm making you a cup of tea. You see, there's different ways that we can look at this question, and what it's used for is a question of purpose. And yet these equations tell us nothing about that. What about this? Is it good or bad? Now, again, you might think, well, electricity is neither good nor bad, but what if I said I was going to use this electricity to power an electric chair to commit capital punishment? Well, now we have to ask, is the use of that electricity a good thing or a bad thing? We're asking a moral question. And yet the equation tells us absolutely nothing about that moral question. And what about this one? Will it do it tomorrow? Will it operate in the same way in the future? David Hume, a famous philosopher from Scotland, he picked up this point in a problem of induction. To say it's worked this way in the past gives us no logical reason to think it's going to work this way in the future. Let's call this the future question. So right at the offset, and very non-controversially, we see that there's a whole load of questions that the equations cannot answer. And in order for us to look at these questions and think about them, and they seem like reasonable and meaningful questions, we need to have a bigger picture that incorporates other things, other ways of thinking. We need to include our sense of logic, our sense of morality. We need to include our intuitions, our introspection, and all these things are outside the realm of the equations. And look, very briefly, what I'd like to do is think about this question. Does God provide a good answer to these questions? And my argument is going to be that the belief in a God or a fundamental mind that is rational and moral that lies behind the universe, behind the equations, gives a very satisfactory answer, that it gives a good answer to some of these questions that fits with our sense of logic, our sense of morality, our intuitions, and our introspections. So let me just briefly paint that worldview of why I think God helps us to make sense of these other questions. And I want to do that by introducing another equation. So you may not know what this equation is, but this is called Einstein's field equation, and it describes the expansion of the universe, the progression of the universe. So it perfectly and mathematically describes how the universe behaves. But let's think about those questions that we just asked about electromagnetism. See, we might ask the ontological question, what is the universe? And of course, there's different theories about this. For an atheist, you have to say, well, it just is something. God, the God hypothesis, a belief in God, would say that it is created, it's made, it is a conception, it's something designed by God. What about this question? Why is it the way it is? Why is it like this? And of course, as an atheist, you'd have to think, well, it could have been a different way just as easily. We seem to see this incredible order in the universe following this equation. And yet we want to ask, what is the cause for that order? Why does it have this incredible structure? Why does it follow the laws? The theist belief, of course, is that there is a God who is rational. So he is someone who would make, he or she is someone who would make a universe that is rational. And in fact, this is what drove a lot of the early scientists in their exploration of the universe. Isaac Newton, who came up with the theories of gravity and motion, he was a believer in God. And in fact, it was his belief in God that drove his desire to seek the equations of the world. He wrote this: "It is the perfection of God's work that they are all done with the greater simplicity, because he is a God of order and not of confusion." You see, the belief in God actually drives an understanding. It gives us an explanation for these equations. What about this question? Is it important? I mean, on the face of it, when we look at the universe, it seems like a cold and empty place. It seems like a place that it doesn't have any sort of importance at all. And yet, consider how much effort humanity has put into explore the universe. Or consider the incredible experience we get when we look up at the stars and consider it as beautiful. Or consider our desire to want to prevent climate change and fight for the planet. We seem to place an incredible value on the universe. And the belief in God grounds this, because the belief in God says that this universe is created by God, and so it is valuable. Or what about this next question? What is it for? And again, when you look at the universe, it seems completely random and accidental. There seems to be so much purposelessness as we look around. And yet at the same time, we find it comprehensible. We can understand it. We can manipulate it for good purposes in technology and in science. It has all the right constants and constituents to bring about life. And when we look at this planet, we see incredible purpose. And so in a theistic worldview where there's a God behind that, there's a reason for that. God has created the universe in such a way to bring about life that has a purpose. And then, is it good or bad? We can, again, look at the world and see so many evils happening, natural disasters that destroy lives and destroy communities. And on an atheistic worldview, those things are just meaningless. They don't matter. But if there's a God behind it who is moral and loving and cares for people, then we have reason to look at those disasters and say, what an evil they are. The belief in God grounds that conclusion that we make. And will it continue? Again, that problem of induction doesn't have a good solution under atheism, but under theism, it has a very good solution. That the universe is continue on because God is constant and God is keeping it going. Okay, so as we look at those questions, my contention is that the belief in a rational, loving mind behind the universe gives us good answers to those questions that atheism doesn't. But let's try and hone it in a little bit further, because maybe you could look at the universe and say, well, look, it does just look vast and cold and empty, and it follows its own laws. Maybe it does seem like there isn't a God and it's just all natural. Maybe it is like Dawkins puts poignantly when he says this: in a universe of electrons and selfish genes, blind physical forces and genetic replication, some people are going to get hurt. Other people are going to get lucky, and you won't find any rhyme or reason in it, nor any justice. The universe that we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is, at bottom, no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pitiless indifference. Maybe the universe is like that, sometimes seems like it. So let me show you one more equation as we sort of bring this to the main point and bring it to a conclusion. Have a look at that equation there, and I wonder if you can guess what that is an equation of. Well, I'll tell you, that is an equation of the chemicals that make up the average human being. You can see we've got some carbon and hydrogen in there, a lot of water, some nitrogen, there's a load of salts, there's some base metal molecules, atoms in there. There's a whole range of things, and that is the sum of the average human being, give or take a few factors. So let's think about those questions in relation to you. See, these questions become the most important questions when you think about your own life. And we see that the equation, the chemical structure, the physicality of what you are doesn't do justice to these questions that we ask of ourselves. Think of them. The question of what are you? It feels like there's more, there's this consciousness, there's this introspection that we feel and know of, that I'm more than matter. Why are you you? What's the reason that you are here? What's it for? Are you important? You know, we sense that there is an incredible value to human life. But what makes human life any more valuable than any other chemical structure or chemical equation? What are you for? We sense that there is a purpose, a reason. We want our lives to have purpose and direction. Are you good or bad? This question matters. We don't want to be able to look at people like Hitler in the past or some evil dictator in the present and say, well, it's just physical. There is no good or bad. We look at that and we cry out and we say, there's an evil going on there. And we don't want to look at someone who does good in the world, someone who's charitable, someone like Mother Teresa, and say, well, she's just chemical. There's neither good nor bad going on here. No, our intuition is that humans have a moral sense to them, that you have obligations, that there's morally good things you can do and bad things you can do. And what about where are you going? You know, this sense that if there's more to me than physical, then does it end with the physical? And when I look at my friends and my family and I consider the value that I put on them, when I consider you watching this video, those equations, those chemical structures, that atheistic worldview without a God doesn't make any sense of what I see and what I feel. And I think you would sense the same. And this is particularly for me where the Christian worldview has such great power to speak into these questions. And there are rational grounds to believe in Christianity as well. We can look at the history of it, we can look at the influence of it, but just on these questions here. You know, in the Christian worldview, you have importance because God has created you. He's given you part of his image. He's given you this great value. You have a purpose. Your purpose is to know God. You can be connected with him. You can feel that sense of spiritual fulfillment as you connect with him. That there's a need for you to strive to be good because God is a good God. He's given us moral direction for us to follow, to work out, to live under. And that there is a future beyond this physical future that God cares about. And let me put this a slightly different way and use a quote from C.S. Lewis that many of you will know from the Chronicles of Narnia, and he did many other writings. He was a philosopher. He became an atheist and then became a Christian. He converted away from atheism to Christianity. He gives this wonderful quote. He says, I believe in Christianity as I believe that the sun has risen, not only because I see it, but because by it, I see everything else. And when you start exploring Christianity and the belief in God, the belief in Jesus and what he came to do in his death and resurrection, as you start exploring it, you see it sheds light on so many of those questions that we have on reality. And the equations fit in with this because the equations describe the physical world, and yet Christianity and God explains those other impulses, those other intuitions that we have. And so, can God be added into the equations? I would say it's essential that we explore outside of the equations to answer these deep and meaningful questions. And then I would argue that God, and specifically Christianity, answers those questions and speaks to us and sheds light on so much of other things as we consider the philosophy and the logic and the intuition, our own introspection. And so I just want to finish the talk by challenging you to look into this more. If science is something that's turned you away from belief in God and you just think of it as this magical, unexplainable thing, I just want to encourage you to look at the philosophical arguments, look at the logic and intuition behind it. And I want to encourage you to look at the life of Jesus, at what he said, what it was about him that has made such an impact on the world. And I've left my email address there because please feel free to email me any questions, any challenges, or if you want me to just talk through with you why I think Christianity answers those questions in such a good way and how you can find out more about it. Okay, thank you very much for listening. I'll stop sharing the slides and hand back to Amber.
Wow, amazing. Thank you so much, Steve. Yeah, that was fascinating and really intriguing. And I'm not scientific myself. To be honest, I don't think I understood one of those equations. But they were, yeah, it was really, really helpful. And yeah, just fascinating to see that actually behind all of those equations and behind the things that we can't see, that there is a God behind that. And I think that was really, yeah, clearly shared. And especially the human anatomy and the equations with that, and how, you know, I think I'm amazed sometimes when I just think of my friend, as you were saying. It makes me think, wow, there's got to be a purpose to that. And yeah, you really clearly showed that. So thank you so much. Yeah, guys, if you still have questions, we do have a few questions, which is really awesome. Please do, please do submit them with the hashtag purpose 23rd. Yeah, do put them in, any questions that you have at all. I'm sure, yeah, we still do have questions. So with all that said, let's ask some questions, if that's okay with you, Steve.
Yeah, absolutely fine.
Awesome. Okay, so the first one is, why can't we just exist because we exist? Why do I have to say a God caused it?
Okay, that's a good question. Let me think of how I would approach that. So I think there are philosophical questions about what it is that exists in the first place. So you can ask the question, do numbers exist? Or does morality exist? And this is a philosophical debate that is kind of stretched throughout the centuries. And the idea that only physical stuff exists doesn't quite match up with the experience of reality that I think we all have. There seems to be these other things that exist also. And so the question then is, what do you do with all this stuff that exists? All right, it's not just physical. We've got, or another thing that it seems to exist is laws of logic. You know, a law like something can't be true and not true at the same time. We know that is true. We've got a sense, a logical sense that that is a real thing that exists. That's a real law, and yet it's not grounded in anything physical, right? So then you have to ask the question, well, what is it that causes all this stuff to exist? And that's a lot of philosophy asks those questions. Plato had a theory of a different realm of existence of all the ideals, and then you've got the physical, and I won't have time to go into all of that now. But if you are just saying everything just exists, there's nothing else, then what you're saying is there's no explanation for its existence. You're saying it just is. And the problem with that is every other thing that we see in reality, we want an explanation for it. If we find a letter comes through the post, we don't just say it just is there on the doormat. We want to explain it, and the explanation is someone put it through the letterbox. So we're wired to look for explanation in everything, and that seems like a sensible sort of inference. In fact, it's what drives science, right? We want to explain why physical things work or how they work. So things cry out for explanation, especially things which are contingent, that depend on other things. So I think to just have the theory of everything that says it just is without any explanation is a huge price to pay, because you have to say there's no explanation, it just is, which really kind of grates against any drive to want to explain anything. Now there's other things I could go into, but I won't now. But I think that's quite a strong kind of driving response to that.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Steve. Yeah, you really answered that well. Okay, so the second question talks about good and evil. So the question is, can you not define good and evil by how it makes people feel? For example, Hitler was evil because he made people suffer. Mother Teresa was good because she helped people.
Yeah, okay, so this is kind of getting into moral philosophy, which is interesting. So there's certain things you can say about people's actions based on some kind of measure, like if it makes people suffer, it's bad. If it makes people, if it enriches people's life, it kind of is good. But then the question would be, well, why is it bad to make people suffer, right? And then you could say, well, because they're in pain. But then why is it bad that they're in pain? And we're left just saying, well, it's just our opinion, right? It's just something we're saying that it's bad to make people suffer. There's nothing objective or true about that fact. And so when we look back at a Hitler, we can't say objectively it was bad what he did, right? Because we're left just saying a similar question. Pain is bad, but we've got no reason to think why pain is bad. And more than that, in morality, we have something called obligation. So we believe we should do something, right? It's not just that Hitler did a bad thing. It was that he shouldn't have done that bad thing. And this is really powerful, because in physics, there's no should. There's no, well, you should do this, electron should do that. It just does it. And yet we have a sense of that there's an extra layer of reality that says there's some things we should do and some things we shouldn't do. We could define that. But to say it's objective, I feel like we want to say more than just Hitler had a different opinion about what was good and bad. We want to be able to say Hitler shouldn't have done that. When someone does a terrible thing like, rape or torturing someone else for fun, we want to say that's bad. It's not just they have a different opinion on what's right. They think it's right, so they do it. We want to say, no, there's something bad. We feel the force, the moral sense in us says that's a wrong thing to do. So I hope that sort of touches on it there. And on a purely physical world, we have nothing really to ground why it's bad. You know, stuff just is. The physical world just is. But that's not enough. I don't think that satisfactorily explains what we experience.
Yeah,
I'll try and be a bit more concise in my next one.
No, that's great. Really, really helpful. Thank you. So we've got like a kind of question statement, I want to say. Yeah, I'll just say it and tell me what you think. So this person has said, just because it would be nicer to believe we have a greater purpose doesn't mean we do.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm glad it came up, because you might have heard what I was saying as saying, well, it feels good, so we should follow it. You know, it feels good to sense we have purpose, and therefore we should follow it. And that's not quite what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, if you look at the philosophical arguments, which are outside science, outside the equations, if you look at the arguments from intuition or arguments from logic, then they I think also lead to this example, lead to this conclusion that there is a rational, loving God behind it. And then when it comes to purpose, which is the one thing you mentioned there, the idea that we have such a drive for purpose, I think that then is explained. You know, God explains that. If you believe in God for those other reasons of philosophy and logic and what you see in the Bible, for example, then that sheds light on why we have such a strong sense of purpose. And you could come up with a physical theory that explains why we have such a strong sense of purpose, something in evolution maybe. But I don't think, I think those answers are probably all right. But then you sum all these different arguments together. You know, you look at the philosophical arguments, the logical arguments, the arguments from intuition, from our sense. And that makes sense then. God makes sense of why we have this drive for purpose. It's a very bleak picture, though, atheism. And this isn't really an argument to believe in God, but it does lead to a very bleak picture. You know, that quote from Dawkins, it's a hard thing. It doesn't mesh with our deep intuitions that actually, ground level, people are just purposeless. My life is really of no value. Whereas, you know, we're willing to fight for the value of each other. So it's something we consider one of the most important things in the universe.
Awesome. Thank you. They are the questions that we've had for today. Thank you for answering them so well. And yeah, for leading us through your talk as well. As Steve said, please do email him. Yeah, he said he'd love to answer any questions or any thoughts that you guys have got. Yeah, he'd be really, really happy to do so. And yeah, we're so grateful for you coming today, Steve. Yeah, just so great to hear from you and to you guys at home at uni. I'm sure you appreciate that as well. If you've been challenged or you're interested in what Steve has said, yeah, please do reach out to him and do reach out to us or the person that's invited you. Please stay around after this and just ask them questions that you might have, anything that's challenging you or intriguing you, and we'd love yeah, to stay around and answer them for you. You can DM us on the Instagram page at elborough_cu or the Facebook page as well. We're a Christian community and we love to help you explore Jesus Christ and the event itself. That's what we aim to do, help you to ask these questions and explore them with us. Now, as for the rest of Events Fortnight, we still do have a few events left for you. I know it's gone by so quickly though. Yeah, it's been mad. But we'd love to invite you to our last 3 events. Tomorrow is a very special open mic night at 7 p.m. on YouTube. And we've got loads of talented people who want to share their creativity. And if you're new here, we at the Christian Union have got loads of Zoom and video calls going on with our members to watch the events. So please do get in touch with us. We do have one final lunch bar as well on Thursday, and the topic is Old and Dusty. Why do Christians bother with the Bible? I think that'd be really, really interesting, and yeah, it'll be sick. And to round off our events fortnight, sad times, we'll have our annual pub quiz, which is one you do not want to miss on Friday. I'm not even going to say anything else, but I'm going to get you very excited because it's going to be lit. So yeah, please do come along to these events. It'll be awesome to see you guys there, and do get in touch with us, as we've already said. One final thank you to Steve. Yes, thank you to Steve, and for all of you guys watching from wherever you are. We've loved having you, and hopefully we will see you again sometime this week. Well, from me, have a blessed day, and we will see you all soon. Goodbye.